Hello everyone, my name is Lewina. Today I'm going to share with you my topic, a comparative study on autistic and ordinary learners' motivation in SLA, second language acquisition. In the introduction part, I will briefly talk about the policy of inclusive education in Hong Kong. Then I will move to the methodology part that I have adopted two of the theories in my questionnaire. Later, we will come to the analysis part that I will compare the data of both parties, autistic and ordinary learners. And most importantly, there will be some of the suggestions for teachers or educators to enhance the effectiveness in teaching, and at last, the conclusion. So let's look at the introduction part first. In the introduction part, I will focus on the reason behind the topic, and I will show you some of the background information of the situation in Hong Kong about inclusive education here. And later, I will talk about the importance of motivation. So let's look at the inclusive education first. Under the policy of inclusive education introduced by the Hong Kong Education Bureau, all public primary schools are obligated to admit students with special educational needs. Therefore, catering for students with diverse learning needs in the same classroom has become essential for schools. With reference to the situation that students with diverse learning needs have to learn in one same classroom, this paper aims to study to what extent autistic students and the ordinary pupils in primary 3 hold a similar or different perspective on learning motivation so as to enhance the effectiveness of L2 learning and teaching in such situation, and most importantly, to suggest some of the teaching methods and approaches. So, why motivation? Motivation plays an important role in language learning, and Ortega also agrees with that motivation contributes to the achievement of students, and some of the researchers even published detailed analysis to show how learners' motivation is highly correlated to the effectiveness of students in acquiring English as a second language. In the light of these findings, a survey has been conducted here, and we will go to the methodology part. I will first show you my questionnaire is about motivation, and I will adopt the theories, self-determination theory, SDT, and the 5 orientations. Let's look at the questionnaire together now. In the questionnaire, I have received 20 samples, and 10 for autistic children and 10 samples from the ordinary students. And it is noticeable that participants are randomly chosen and they are in the same P3 class to be taught by one teacher. And they are Hong Kong local residents, so that I am sure that their second language is English. The aim of the questionnaire is to investigate their diverse needs and individual differences, so as to evaluate the similarities and differences of their motivation in learning English. Let's look at what theory I have adopted. For the first one is self-determination theory. It's about intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation here. Intrinsic motivation is about individual factors that students learn in order to gain a sense of satisfaction or like the subject. And for extrinsic motivation, it's about external factors that students learn in order to get an award or receive some of the rewards by the teachers and be praised by teachers or even to avoid punishment. And for the 5 orientation, the first one is integrative orientation, that students or learners learn in order to learn more about the culture. And the second one is travel orientation, that students learn a language to travel around the world. The third is friendship orientation, learn a language in order to meet new friends or its friends-related factors. Number 4, knowledge orientation, that learners acquire language for the reason of gaining knowledge. And 5th, instrumental orientation, that students acquire the language for a goal in order to get a job or a job promotion. By adopting these theories into my questionnaire, I put forward 18 statements by using I want to learn English because I could communicate with the native speaker of English, or I want to learn English because I could understand the cartoons, videos, TV programs being in English. Noted that The representation of rating 1 represents strongly agree and 4 represents totally disagree. That's the arrangement. And for the questionnaire template, items are related to either intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and it is represented by the colored in the numbers here. You can see in red, it represents extrinsic motivation, which means number 3, 4, 8, 9, 11, 13, 15, 16, and 18 are related to extrinsic motivation, and the others in blue are intrinsic motivation. And items are also related to different orientations here. For the sentences, number 1, I want to learn English because I could communicate with the native speaker of English is in green. Therefore, it is related to integrative orientation and so on. So let's go to the analysis part. For the analysis part, I will go in depth to the similarity of differences based on the two theories that I have just talked about. It's about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation as reference to SDD and the 5 orientations. And I find out that there are other motivations, and we will do summary later. So let's look at the differences of motivation on 2 of the subgroups now. With reference to SDT, there are 2 types of motivation here. You can see extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in red and in blue. The data reveals that the ordinary students here refer extrinsic motivation as their major motivation in acquiring language because the majority of the OP, the autistics, the ordinary students in the mode strongly agree is indicated for number 1 with 6 out of 9 statements in red here. And these statements in red actually are related to extrinsic motivation. While the ordinary students only favor extrinsic motivation, autistic students here show a mixture of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation in English learning, since they strongly agreed with 5 sentences on extrinsic motivation on number 4, 9, 11, 15, and 16, and they also strongly agree with sentence 5 and 6, which is considered as related to intrinsic motivation. These statistics clearly show that extrinsic motivation is the major incentive of both of the groups, and intrinsic motivation still plays a role in autistic students' mind to acquire English to a certain extent. So we'll look at the similarities of motivation. For similarities on extrinsic motivation, we can come to a conclusion that according to number 16, I want to learn English because my parents want me to learn well. It shows that both of the groups refuse the fact that learning, they are easily driven by the parents' expectation as suggested for the same average score here, 1.2, and 1.2 here. For the ordinary student group, this assumption even received the lowest average mark, 1.2, among all of the options. This signifies that the expectation of their parents actually can serve as a motivation for them to learn, since this is the only way to avoid being punished. This phenomenon actually can be explained here by the external regulation as suggested in the SDT theory. And for the 5 orientations now, for similarities, in integrative orientation doesn't motivate them to learn. Communicating with native English speakers is not an incentive for both of the groups to learn English, since here, number 4, is indicated in a mode, which means strongly disagreed, frequently appears in the student's answers. And the average score 2.9 here also shows that the similar conclusion that both groups actually disagree with the statement. However, it is noticeable that the standard deviation here, 1.10 and 1.29 for both groups, is contrasting with each other, which shows that actually the opinions of the students are contrasting with each other, and there may be 1 or 2 exceptions, but the majority of the students are strongly disagree with this statement, and this still takes the lead. for travel orientation, as most of the adults may want to use the language when they travel abroad. It shows that young learners in this participant do not follow the idea, and this is supported by the highest average score here, 3.6 and 3.2. This illustrates that most of the involved students do not consider travel orientation as their major motivation in learning English. For instrumental orientation, which motivates students to learn, both of the autistic students and the ordinary pupils are highly motivated by instrumental orientation, and this conclusion comes from the results drawn from particularly these two sentences. I want to learn English because I want to be praised by the teachers, and I want to learn English because I could get stickers or gifts from English teachers. Most of the students select 1 here, 1, 1, 1, and 1, which indicated the number strongly agree here according to the mode in these two teacher-related issues. These two statements have also received a relatively lower average score ranging from 1.1 to 1.5 here, which is considered as one of the factors of motivating students to learn English. Therefore, it is summarized that most of the students agree that being praised by the teachers and receiving rewards from the teachers can highly encourage them to learn L2. Apart from the sentences related to teachers, the efforts in maintaining good results also motivate them to learn. According to the data here, the statement received an identical average score here, 1.3 and 1.3 in both parties, and strongly agree here 1 and 1 is appeared in the mode and is the most frequently chosen option. This shows that the motivation in learning English and it serves as an instrument for them to score higher average score in examination. Using English to post messages on social platforms also is another motivation for English learning, since most of them share the same opinion by writing number 1 in a mode here. This means that these assumptions are 1.4 and 1.5 here, which clearly shows that both groups strongly agree with the statement that they want to learn English because this allows them to post messages in English on social platforms and they think it's a fancy thing to do with. And for knowledge orientation, it's surprisingly that orientation do motivating them in a small extent here. With reference to the data, the students from both groups, ordinary students and autistic students, show an agreement on the issue as shown by the number 2 here, 2 and 2 in the mode, whereas the level of agreement in the statement is relatively lower than the other orientation as stated above, like number 1 here, number 16. So it serves as an encouragement in a small extent. So let's just look at the differences here. There are some distinctive perceptions on music and songs. While the majority of the students from AS, which means autistic students, strongly agree with the idea indicated by 1, like singing English song is an incentive for them to learn English, and the average score is 1.3. Most of the students in ordinary students group oppose with the idea by stating 3 in a mode and 3 in a mean. This further ascertains that this integrative orientation can only motivate autistic students to learn, and yet the students from ordinary students group remain greatly unmotivated. Another distinctive perception is on the nature of English. With reference to this sentence 12, I want to learn English because learning English is fun. To most of the autistic students, seeing English as a fun subject actually is not an incentive for them to motivate them to learn, as number 3 here indicated disagree with both. It describes that the majority of the students from AS, the autistic student, do not agree with that statement. In contrast, most of the people in ordinary students here do agree with that statement by stating this too. It shows that a distinction between the perception of the two parties or the statement of integrative orientation here. Other motivation besides SDT and 5 orientation. Besides the major classification theory on learning motivation, teachers' own charisma and personality also serve as a motivation for primary students to acquire English language. By comparing the data, the distinction between the two groups are presented by the status here collected in the category mode 3 and 1. The majority of the autistic students strongly agree with the statement here by indicating 1 here, and it is the highest level of agreement, whereas the ordinary students disagree with that idea. The majority of the students in autistic students group still highly motivated if the teacher is popular among them. So we come to the summary of learning motivation of ordinary students here. For ordinary students, as mentioned, extrinsic motivation and instrumental orientation are two of the major incentives that drive both of the ordinary pupils to obtain knowledge of English language. While the data collected from the students from both of the groups are quite similar actually, there is still some of the major distinction between them. For the ordinary student group is the only group which held a strong sense of agreement by saying strongly agree and that's hypothesis free. I want to learn English because I could be the English ambassador to lead the younger ones. Whereas the student from AS group, autistic student group, only agreed with the statement here by stating 2. These subtle differences actually shows the importance of statement 3, which makes it stand out from the others. And by comparing and contrasting the levels of agreement in this chart, we can actually see that the majority of the students from ordinary pupils group emphasize the actual learning outcomes and the benefits of learning English by stating strongly agree here. And this actually clearly illustrated learning English enables them to have a chance to take up the leader positions at school and hence empower them to lead the little ones. The results also suggest the idea that the students from ordinary pupil groups are more eager and willing to become leaders than the AS, the autistic students group in general. So, for the learning motivation of autistic student here, AS. With reference to this chart, extrinsic motivation and instrumental orientation continue to play a dominant role in motivating students to learn. Yet, intrinsic motivation and integrated orientation also contributes to their motivation in learning English to a certain extent. While the ordinary students do not consider the factors in statement 5 and 6 able them to motivate their learning, on the contrary, the students in autistic students group strongly agree with the two. From the perspective of the latter, which means is the autistic students, singing English songs is suggested as one of the major reasons for them to acquire English, and this proves that intrinsic motivation and integrative orientation also serve as the motivation in their language learning. Moreover, it is also suggested that a good teacher-student relationship is crucial in motivating them to learn, since the impression of a teacher highly affects their willingness of language learning. Come to the most important part, developing a new approach here. So, the new approach for teachers is the importance of motivation, and I will talk about the PCC approach and the PCC approach in inclusive education. So first, we'll talk about the importance of motivation and the relation of this new idea. Motivation is essential in learning, and therefore teachers should take students' motivation into consideration to maintain effective language learning and teaching. The finding reveals that most of the students in P3 are motivated extrinsically and integrated orientated, and given that autistic students are motivated by both intrinsically, extrinsically, and integrative orientated, students with different abilities have different preferences on motivation. Therefore, this paper advocates a mixed teaching approach which includes three major components: positive education, computer-assisted language teaching, and collaborative learning here, P, C, and C. PCC approach. A positive teaching approach puts emphasis on positive language learning activities and experience, such as receiving rewards or becoming a team leader, and this can motivate OP, ordinary pupils, and autistic students intrinsically and engage them to learn. However, this positive teaching approach could only cater for the needs of most P3 students, and the motivation of some students with autism is still neglected. Therefore, a mixed approach CNC with computer-assisted language teaching and collaborative learning. This can enable students to learn intrinsically, and they will be intrinsically motivated in learning English. For instance, some of the Google Classroom and Moodle actually helps them to allows them to share opinions here. And numerous topics like songs, of course, assignments, and other popular cultures can reinforce the inner beauty of acquiring language. Some researchers have proven that students with intrinsic motivation could learn the language more effectively than the ones with only extrinsic motivation. This further demonstrates that the relation between intrinsic motivation and learning effectiveness. With this PCC approach, we take both OP, the ordinary pupils, and the autistic students' learning motivation into account. A brief framework here for teachers to enhance students' learning efficiency by fulfilling learners' motivation intrinsically and extrinsically, and integrative and instrumental oriented platform allows students to learn collaboratively with one another in the same environment. The conclusion: even though autistic and ordinary pupils are both studying in the same learning environment under the policy of inclusive education, students with different abilities still reveal individual differences in their learning motivation in English. By looking at the collected data, it is suggested that the idea that extrinsic motivation and instrumental orientation best suits the majority of the participants regarding their willingness in learning English as a second language, given the condition that autistic students may use more efforts of teachers in developing a mixed approach here PCC based on intrinsic motivation, instrumental, and integrative orientation to cater for the diverse needs of learners so to enhance the effectiveness of junior English language teaching. This is the end of my presentation and I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you.